Olga is the head of responsible investment at Church Commissioners for England. At the end of 2023, the Church Commissioners Fund held assets valued at £10.4 billion. Olga is a solicitor by background, graduated from the University of Sydney, and has served on multiple organizations as chair of UK Sustainable Investment and Finance, Tropical Forest Alliance, and the International Corporate Governance Network. Her leadership and advocacy in responsible investments have shaped many financial institutions and managers. She's someone that I personally admire for her vision and commitment to positive change. An interesting fact, she speaks 4 languages. That's English, French, Indonesian, and Norwegian. So Olga, welcome to Real Returns.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with the first question. We'd love to get to know more about you, your career journey, and what led you to responsible investments. Was there a defining moment that made you realize that was the path for you?
Thank you very much. I'd say, looking back, there was definitely a defining moment, although I wouldn't have known it at the time. So, as you mentioned, my background was actually in law. So I started off with an arts law degree at the University of Sydney as a graduate. And in Australia, you're required to do a double degree. So I had actually wanted to study languages. I'd been on exchange and had focused on languages as my A-level equivalent, but I had a timetabling clash because of doing the law as well and ended up in a geography lecture. So I studied first year geography, and then my mother encouraged me to go on a field school to Southeast Asia. That was Thailand, Laos and Vietnam. It was absolutely inspiring because it was right at the time, particularly Vietnam, and it was opening up to capitalism, and we were looking at the impacts of that on the environment, on major dam developments transferring into a market-based economy, making land suddenly available for capital, etc. So at that point in time, I realized, wow, the environment really matters because it's really important to people's livelihoods, and it's linked to all these other kind of huge dynamic changes which are going on in the world. So it was absolutely fascinating. So I stuck with the environment as a key theme, or sustainability, after that throughout my degree and career. So when I finished off law school, I then focused on things like environmental law, human rights law, and Indigenous people in the law to get through law school, which by that stage I found rather dry. Then I went for about 8 years into the big law firms and worked in environmental law, mainly in environmental litigation. And then I was in the UK, living in the UK. This is about 14 years ago now, after I'd had children, and took on the role at that stage leading the pro bono practice at international law firm Simmons & Simmons. Again, not really so much environmental law, but looking at a broad range of human rights and sustainability issues, how to implement the SDGs, which came into effect at that stage, and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And I also worked with the Legal Response Initiative, which was advising the least developed country group in the UN climate change negotiations. So all those things grew from having done the geography degree all those years ago and having gone on that field trip that kind of brought all the threads together. And then after I'd been in that role over 8 years, I was looking at what to do next. And actually somebody within the firm who worked in asset management suggested ESG. And then I realised that the whole asset management field, investment, even lending to some extent, was really concerned about all these issues I've been working on around international climate change frameworks, the Paris Agreement, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So I kind of segued across to responsible investments 6 years ago now at the Church Commissioners, initially in an engagement role, and now I'm in the role of Head of Responsible Investment, as you noted.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, it's great to have that law background as well, because you'll see all the different jurisdictions, how that's being applied. And I'm sure you've seen how that's evolved over the years as well, kind of globally. If you can share as well some of the biggest challenges or setbacks that you've seen throughout your career.
Yeah, I think in terms of challenges or setbacks in sustainable investment and responsible investing, I think there's very long-term trajectories, but they really go up and down and wave up and down. And so back when I was in environmental law, it boomed for a very long time in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, and we had the EU ETS come in and the Stern report, and there was so much enthusiasm around addressing climate change and environmental issues and social issues at that time. And I always say this to people coming into the field now. And then we had the financial crisis. My team got shut down and I got made redundant at the time, and overnight it just disappeared. But it wasn't just the personal impact. There was a shutdown around the market. People completely lost interest in those issues. They were just trying to keep companies solvent at that stage. And it disappeared for a couple of years. And then around 2014, 15, this all came back again, and there's been this huge boom. There's been the Paris Agreement and all this incredible excitement around ESG. And then I saw in 2021, 2022, the same thing happen. It was crazy. There was so much enthusiasm for ESG and responsible investment, and every large asset manager was setting up ESG funds, and sustainability was at the forefront of every single podcast and an event you could imagine. And then about a year or two, we had the same kind of thing. We had a backlash and a step back. There's it comes in waves, and you just have to ride that out. And I think the thing is just to stay quite linear along these waves, because actually these issues around sustainable investment, whether it's climate change or geopolitical issues, no matter what happens, are not going away, and financial markets or companies are always going to have to deal with them. But it's just to realize that the swings and roundabouts in this, and just to keep a straight line throughout all of these. So I guess in a more practical sense, in my current role, that manifests as a lot of stakeholder inquiries. So that can be, board members or the media or NGOs or whoever it might be. And they tend to be the inquiries or queries tend to be quite extreme. So, a few years ago, it was like, you're not doing enough. This is here, you need to do more. And now it's like, now there's this backlash or pushback, and it's how to deal with that. But really, all these trends are macro level trends. It's just a matter of staying focused, focusing on the facts.
You're absolutely right. And I completely agree with that. And I love that you shared that, you have to think of it as it comes in waves. So we're hoping that it would be a linear progression, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. And we just have to deal with how it really goes up and down. And as long as the overall trajectory it's going up, I think that's where we want to be. And I hope we can get out of this current down wave, if you like, in responsible investments and sustainable investing. What has surprised you most about working in this area? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about the field?
I think the thing that surprised me most when I came into it was how big some of the numbers are we're dealing with. So I couldn't believe it when I came into the church commissioners, and we were talking about an endowment that was worth, as you said, billions of pounds. But then when I'd speak with large asset managers or peers in the field, we were talking about trillions of pounds or US dollars of assets under management. And it's such a large number. And I guess in some ways it makes people in finance incredibly powerful, which is quite scary. I was in Indonesia in February with Investor Policy Dialogue on deforestation, and during that time caught up with an Indonesian friend who's a university professor there, and I was explaining what I was doing there, and I said, I'm with this group of investors and we're representing 11 trillion AUM. And she said, you mean Indonesian rupiah? And I said, oh no, US dollars. And it just rattled off the tongue, and I felt a little bit embarrassed because I was thinking, well, the Indonesian economy I think is a little bit over a trillion of GDP US dollars every single year, and this is the world's fourth largest country, and we sit here as investors, allocating capital, huge vast sums of it, and whether we like it or not, that have significant impact on environmental and social outcomes. So we have a huge responsibility there, and always have to be quite mindful of that.
And what excites you the most about the future of responsible and sustainable investing? What do you think are the challenges that the industry really needs to focus on and overcome?
Yeah, I think what's most exciting was the point I made a little bit earlier on, which is the fact that a lot of these micro trends are actually really exciting. So I recently read a called "Not the End of the World," which is looking at all the data sets in our world in database, and it actually says that if you look at all these trends, whether it be renewable energy or you look at deforestation is coming down around the world. We all know about the energy transition, the fact that since 2015 we investment into renewable energy is now twice that of into fuels. So whilst we can be quite concerned about what's going on more broadly in the world at the moment, there's this incredible number of inflection points we're sitting on, and that can be quite daunting, but it's also quite exciting. And what's critical to that is, for the first time really in history, we're able to decouple pollution and environmental damage from economic growth. So we can see that with renewable energy, that's been made quite possible. It's possible to grow economically without having to carry out deforestation, etc. So we have this opportunity that hasn't been there for earlier generations, and that's really exciting. And I think we really need to seize upon that and not let the momentum on that disappear.
Thank you. I think that's a great example. And yeah, I fully agree with you around the energy transition. I think that's important, and we need to continue with this trajectory and momentum that we've gained over the years. Last question for you, Olga. Could you share perhaps one or two more examples of successful, either responsible, sustainable investment initiatives over the years? And what factors do you think made these particularly effective?
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's so much. I mean, responsible investment is so broad. So you can make capital allocation decisions, and that's incredibly important. I won't talk about any specific allocations we've made. Obviously, there's about 2 trillion USAUM being allocated into the energy transition annually, which I touched on before, which is incredibly exciting, that shift. But that's based, well, both the Paris Agreement as a signal, but many capital allocations underneath that has enabled that to happen over the last decade, and it's been so rapid, and we're seeing an S-curve on that now. So that is incredibly exciting. So we've got that ability to allocate capital, but the other part of responsible investment is the broader stewardship aspect to it, where we're stewarding assets which may not be part of an energy transition or a social transition or have a positive social impact, but we're looking at what we can do to mitigate harm and to ensure that they're responsibly managed. So I've been involved in quite a few of those over the years, which have been really fantastic at any level. But just more recently, over the last couple of years, I've been involved in a lot of policy engagement that I found quite exciting. So you can engage with a company and say, change their modern slavery policy or the way they deal with modern slavery and make a difference at that level. But there's also the possibility now for broader investor coalitions to engage with governments and make a difference there. So I'll mention the one I said a little earlier on, which is the Investor Policy Dialogue on Deforestation. So that started in mid-2020. A group of investors led by Stewardship wrote to the Brazilian government initially at the time with regards to the very high rates of deforestation in the Amazon. And that was seen to be problematic because it was impacting biodiversity, obviously, and there were risks into supply chains, but also because of the impact that had on the global climate. So the Brazilian government responded at the time, and an engagement opened up. And then later on that year, or about 4 years ago, I was involved in setting up a work stream engaging with the Indonesian government. And similar at the time, Indonesia had made great gains in reducing deforestation, but there were concerns that that needed to continue on with some legislative reform happening at the time. So we opened up an engagement with the Indonesian government, who are very receptive to that over the years. And we've, as a group, there were 8 of us, as I said, representing 11 trillion AUM, 84 investors visited in February 2025. And we had over 15 meetings that week, from regulators to ministers, etc., course of the week. And we're able to put forward that message, despite everything going on in the world, that there's this huge global capital that is still aligned with the objectives and still wants to both allocate capital into the sustainable transition, but also to ensure that no harm is caused, and emerging markets in maintaining that transition and ensuring, particularly with this group, that no deforestation or reduced deforestation is occurring.
Thank you, Olga, for sharing all of those. Whenever I speak to you, I learn so much and I pick up so many ideas as well. And it's an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy that you took time to share your insights today. So thank you. Really thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it.